On a fall morning in 2006, a federal judge in Newark, New Jersey, signed an order that would cost one company $125 million. The company was not a bank. It was not an insurer. It made hand tools. The people receiving the money were not customers. They were not competitors. They were the company's own dealers. 3,200 still driving their routes, 2,900 who no longer could. Each of them had once signed the same contract. Each had bought a truck. Each had borrowed against a wall of steel tool drawers and a list of addresses they were told belonged to them alone. 5 years earlier, most of those same dealers had defended that company to anyone who questioned it. They called it the best opportunity in the trade. They called the truck freedom. But the real story of the tool truck business is not a single lawsuit and not a single company. It is the story of a contract written in 1950, upheld by a federal appeals court in 1963, that turned tens of thousands of American mechanics into business owners on paper and employees in everything but name. Every week, we tell the stories behind the machines and the companies that built the modern world. Give the video a like and subscribe if you want to keep hearing them. The story begins in 1950, not with a truck, but with a decision to stop paying salesmen. Before 1950, the tool salesman was an employee. He drove a company truck, carried a company price list, and collected a company paycheck every Friday, whether he sold 10 wrenches or none. This arrangement worked well enough in good years. In lean ones, it bled the company dry. Fixed wages meant fixed costs, and fixed costs meant a manufacturer absorbed every slow month, every bad territory, every salesman who simply didn't have the drive to knock on one more garage door. In 1950 and 1951, the largest hand tool makers in America made a quiet but permanent change. They stopped employing route salesmen. They began selling franchises instead. The new arrangement inverted the risk entirely. A man who wanted to sell tools no longer collected a paycheck. He bought one. He purchased an inventory of wrenches, sockets, and ratchets outright, often tens of thousands of dollars worth, and he bought or leased the truck to carry them. In exchange, the company granted him something no employee had ever held, an exclusive territory, a defined list of garages, shops, and service bays that only he was permitted to call on. Court records from a 1993 Oregon lawsuit preserve what this looked like at street level. One plaintiff, a former auto body mechanic with no prior business experience, invested approximately $22,000 of his own savings into inventory and accounts. He then signed a promise to pay a further $22,500 out of future sales, $44,500, committed before he had sold a single ratchet. He was not unusual. He was the model working as designed. For the company, the arithmetic was elegant. The manufacturer no longer carried the cost of unsold inventory sitting in a warehouse. The dealer did, the moment he signed. The manufacturer no longer carried the risk of a bad month. The dealer's household budget did. What the company retained was everything that mattered: the brand, the pricing structure, the wholesale relationship, and the contractual right to define and later redefine the very territory the dealer had staked his savings on. Before 1950, there had been no path for an ordinary mechanic to own a piece of a national tool brand without capital he didn't have. The franchise model filled that gap precisely. It offered a truck, a name customers already trusted, and a printed contract promising a territory no other dealer could touch. The pitch was simple, and it worked because part of it was true. A man really could walk away from a factory floor and within a few years be driving his own truck, running his own route, collecting his own money. Thousands did exactly that, and some of them built genuinely profitable businesses that lasted decades. But the contract that made that possible contained a second promise, one written in smaller print and tested far less often before a jury: the company's right to end the arrangement, redraw the boundaries, or open a competing outlet inside that same territory whenever it judged the business reasons sufficient. In 1950, almost no one read that far. They read exclusive territory, and they signed. The exclusivity a dealer signed for had a very specific shape. It was not, in most cases, a shape on a map. It was a list. Manufacturers called it a list of calls, a fixed set of addresses, businesses, and repair shops that a dealer was authorized to visit on a weekly rotation, and that no other dealer of the same brand was permitted to approach. A list of calls could be assembled in an afternoon by a regional manager with a phone book. A geographic territory, by contrast, required surveys, population data, and years of accumulated route experience to draw correctly. The list of calls was cheaper to create and easier to sell, which meant a company could authorize new franchises faster than it could verify whether each new list actually contained enough paying customers to support a household. For nearly a decade after the franchise system began, its legality remained untested. Then, in 1958, the Federal Trade Commission brought a case against the largest of these tool companies, arguing that assigning dealers to exclusive, non-overlapping call lists eliminated competition between dealers of the same brand, a practice the Commission considered no different from rival companies illegally dividing up a market between themselves. The case reached the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit in 1963. The court disagreed with the Commission. It ruled that a manufacturer's exclusive territorial franchise was not, on its face, a violation of federal antitrust law, that a company was entitled to organize its own dealer network as it judged necessary for efficient, orderly distribution, so long as the restriction was not unreasonable in scope. That ruling did not just resolve one lawsuit, it became the legal foundation the entire industry built on for the next half-century. Every major tool company that followed, and several that would not exist for another 20 years, structured its dealer contracts on the confidence that exclusive territories, list-based or geographic, would hold up in federal court. The moat this created was not a patent, it was not a textbook given away to trade schools. It was a legal precedent, and it protected something more valuable than any single product: the company's right to control thousands of small, technically independent businesses through a single standardized contract, enforceable nationwide. Recruitment followed a consistent pattern industry-wide. Companies did not primarily seek out experienced businessmen. They sought working mechanics, men who already understood the product, already trusted the brand from years of buying tools off someone else's truck, and who had rarely, if ever, read a franchise disclosure document or negotiated a commercial contract before signing one. By the 1970s and 1980s, at least 3 other major hand tool companies, operating under different names but the same underlying architecture, had adopted the identical model: independent dealer, owned inventory, exclusive call list, and a termination clause that favored the company that wrote it. The system scaled the way any well-designed distribution network scales. More dealers meant more trucks on more streets, which meant more tools sold, which meant more revenue flowing upward to a handful of corporate parents, while the capital risk of each individual route stayed exactly where it had been placed since 1950, on the dealer, alone, behind the wheel. By the early 2000s, the largest company built on this model operated a network of more than 3,200 active dealers across the United States, each one technically an independent business owner, each one bound to the same standardized franchise agreement first tested in federal court decades earlier. The scale was staggering by design. A single dealer, working alone, could only cover so many stops in a week. But 3,000 dealers, each covering a distinct list of 40 to 60 shops, gave the parent company direct weekly access to well over 100,000 garages, repair bays, and mechanic stations nationwide, without the company itself employing a single one of the people driving those routes. Inside that system, success stories were real, and they were not rare exceptions manufactured for a recruiting brochure. In Waco, Texas, one dealer built a route that crossed a threshold almost no one in that territory believed possible. He was told early in his career that no dealer in the Waco market had ever pushed annual sales past $1 million. He did it. Then he did it again the following year. His name was King Regin, and for a stretch of years he was, by the company's own sales figures, one of the most productive dealers in the region. He had built what the entire franchise pitch promised was possible: a route that started as a truck and a list of addresses and grew into a genuine 6-figure business, then a 7-figure one. Stories like his were the engine of recruitment. A mechanic weighing whether to leave a factory floor for a tool route did not picture the dealers who quietly failed and disappeared. He pictured the ones like Regin, proof, driving down Main Street every Tuesday, that the system could work exactly as advertised. The culture built around the truck went deeper than sales figures. For 2 generations of American mechanics, the tool truck's weekly stop was not a sales call. It was a relationship. The dealer knew a customer's name, his shop, his kids, which brand of ratchet he'd complained about last spring. Trust in the dealer often ran deeper than trust in the tool company whose logo was painted on the truck's side panel. A loyalty built one Tuesday afternoon at a time, one handshake at a time, for years. This was the system at its institutional peak, not a single dramatic year, not a wartime contract or a landmark invention, but a decade in which the model itself was considered the industry standard, copied by every major competitor, defended in court, and trusted by both the dealers signing the contracts and the mechanics buying from their trucks. And it was at that exact peak, inside the exact territory that had just made history, that the same contract clause protecting a dealer's exclusivity was about to be used against him. On August 26, 2014, King Regin received a certified letter from Snap-on's regional manager. It accused him of poaching, selling tools outside the boundaries of his assigned territory. 2 days later, a second certified letter arrived. It cited an unusually high volume of tools returned under warranty from his route over recent years, and announced that the company would now require Regin to submit a form for every single warranty return, customer name, address, contact information, before any credit would be issued. No other dealer in the network, by his account, operated under that requirement. Regin and his wife believed the timing was not a coincidence. Waco had just crossed a sales threshold no one thought the market could support. The company, they came to believe, wanted a larger share of what that territory was now proven to be worth. Not long after, a company-operated store opened inside the same market Regin had spent years building. The clause that made this possible had been sitting in his contract since the day he signed it. Exclusive territory, the agreement promised. But exclusive was defined entirely by the company, and so was the process for ending it. A dealer who spent a decade building a route built it on land he never owned. Regin was not alone, and his case was not the first. 8 years earlier, in 2006, a federal class action had already forced a reckoning. The lawsuit alleged the company had known, in territory after territory, that certain call lists simply did not contain enough paying customers to support a new dealer's household, and sold the franchise anyway. When a dealer failed under that weight, court filings alleged, the same undersized territory was packaged again and sold to the next hopeful mechanic walking off a factory floor. The settlement reached that year totaled $125 million, $60 million in forgiven debt, $38 million paid directly to current and former dealers, covering 3,200 active franchises and 2,900 who had already lost theirs. The human cost behind those numbers rarely appeared in a press release. Attorneys who spent years representing tool dealers described a familiar arc, repeated across states and decades. Families who lost their homes, marriages that didn't survive the debt, bankruptcies filed by people who had believed, entering the business, that hard work alone would be enough. In at least one documented case, a dealer for a major company took his own life. By the 2000s, the pattern had become visible even to federal lenders. The Small Business Administration reviewed the tool dealer franchise structure and determined it exerted a level of control over its franchisees, dictating exactly which addresses a dealer could call on, exactly how returns were processed, inconsistent with the SBA's definition of a genuinely independent business owner. The agency stopped guaranteeing loans for new dealers under that model. 2 competing tool franchises carried default rates. The SBA's own data placed at 37% and 42%. The contract had never changed its promise. It had only ever needed to be enforced selectively. King Regin did not disappear the way so many dealers before him had. He hired the same attorney who had won the 2006 class action and filed his own claim. Then he did something the company likely did not anticipate. He rebuilt his route under a competitor's name, Cornwell Tools, and much of his customer base in Waco followed him there. The territory he had built by hand could be taken. The trust he had built one Tuesday at a time could not. For most dealers, the ending looked different, quieter, final. The letter arrived, the territory was reassigned, the inventory came due in full, the truck was repossessed, the dream ended on a certified mail receipt, not in a courtroom. The franchise architecture built in 1950 and upheld by federal appeals judges in 1963 is in its essential shape still the model in use today. Snap-on, Mac Tools, Matco, and Cornwell all continue to operate dealer networks built on exclusive territories, owned inventory, and a contract the company writes and the dealer signs. The lawsuits changed practices at the margins: clearer disclosures, revised termination procedures, closer scrutiny of undersized territories before they're sold. They did not dismantle the underlying structure. Nothing has replaced it, because for the manufacturers, nothing has needed to. The system still finds new dealers the same way it always has: a territory reassigned, a route repossessed, a franchise terminated. And within months, that same list of addresses is packaged again and offered to the next mechanic ready to trade a factory paycheck for a truck of his own. The route does not disappear when a dealer fails. It simply changes hands, the way it always has since 1950. For some, the system still delivers exactly what it promises: genuine ownership, real income, a relationship with customers no employer could offer. King Regin is the clearest evidence of that, a man the company itself tried to remove from a market he'd built, who instead rebuilt that same market under a competitor's banner and kept most of his customers with him. The territory belonged to the company. The trust did not. There is a quieter footnote to the 1963 ruling that outlived the tool truck industry entirely. The Seventh Circuit's decision that a manufacturer's exclusive territorial franchise is not, by itself, a violation of federal antitrust law has been cited for decades since in franchise disputes far outside the automotive trade. In food service, in retail, in industries whose founders had never heard of a socket wrench. A case about mechanics' tools became one of the quiet legal foundations of how franchising itself works in America. What the tool truck model exposes, more clearly than almost any other American business story, is the narrow and often invisible line between owning a business and operating one on someone else's terms. The dealer held the note on the inventory. He carried the debt. He absorbed the loss when a territory came up short, but he never held the one thing an owner is supposed to hold above all else: the right to keep what he built, on his own terms, for as long as he chose to keep it. Thousands of men signed that contract believing the word exclusive meant something permanent. For some, it did. For many more, it meant only that the company had not yet decided to take it back. Tuesday morning, in a small city that could be almost anywhere in America, a tool truck pulls up outside a garage the way it has for 70 years. A mechanic steps out from under a lift to look over what's new on the shelves. The dealer behind the wheel knows his name, knows his shop, knows which wrench he complained about last spring. Neither of them knows whether that territory will still belong to the man driving the truck a year from now. See you in the next one.